track is on nurturing student engagement and belonging. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this almost the last session. I know there are people with catch trains and things like that, so we will try and keep up the time as much as possible. I am Pratibha. I'm a lecturer here at the King's Business School, and it's my pleasure to chair the session. So this specific track focuses on student engagement and student belonging. So what we mean by that is how can we use inclusive pedagogy to build student engagement and belonging? And many of our presenters here have a very, very diverse background and they come from various universities and institutions. And what they've done is they've brought forward very, very insightful work for us to discuss and explore how we can help students and build student engagement. So, end of the day, it's all about inclusive pedagogy. And what we are hoping today is collectively, all of their contributions sort of help us to challenge our own ways of working, how we sort of design a learning material, how do we sort of deliver the learning material, and how do we evaluate the learning material specifically to build student learning and student experiences. So each presentation is 20 minutes, and that will be followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. And I am going to welcome my first set of speakers. We have Michelle Morgan from the University of East London and Jonathan Neves from Advanced Hedgie. Whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Michelle Morgan. I'm Dean of Students at the University of East London.
Jonathan Neves, Head of Research and Surveys at Advanced HE.
So what we can do, can keep your bells and whistles stop tour, throw lots of ideas at you and thoughts. But importantly, it's about how we as a sector can effectively bridge the secondary and tertiary divide using something called a career academic passion. I've been doing these for many, many years, over 25 years, normally called entry to study. But I'm also going to be talking about the importance of this activity, but how, as a national pilot, we're going to be rolling it out in England and what we're looking at. So basically, the aim of this very short session is to look at the challenges we're facing, understanding our student body, and identifying stages in the student life cycle that are very, very pivotal, what we need to think about, and proactive interventions. So I was that working class, first generation, mixed race female who shouldn't have gone on to do A-levels, let alone actually gone on to further education at all. My parents, as long as I lived under their roof, basically I had to go out to work. At the age of 24, as a mature student, I went back and went to Polytechnic. I wasn't clever enough to go to university, but Polytechnic gave me a place. And it was one of the scariest moments in my life, but it's so exhilarating. And what I started to realise was, I love that learning environment so much, I decided to go and get a job in university. Because in 1992, many polys went to university studies. And straight away, using all my skills and my experience as a student, I started to realise that the main focus was on the first 2 weeks. There was a them and us attitude between the academics and the administrators, but there was also silo practices between the centre and the faculty, schools, the departments. And as I saw the diversity in this, I saw that the scaffolding, academic scaffolding may have come down as students progressed, but as they went on, their personal scaffolding went up. I would have academics coming to my office and moan about the students. I would have students moaning about the academics. I probably moan about everyone. What I realised was this. We were all servants of the learning imperative. It didn't matter the role we played. We all had to come together to be able to have an integrated process that really provided a safe, welcoming space for our students, but also for our staff to thrive and survive. But it depended on the role that you did, and you'd look at things through a certain lens. So if you're in finance, you'd be looking at, are they home or, as was, EU overseas students? If you're on disability, you'd be looking at disability. In the classroom, you look like a faceless learner. But I started to realise as well, it wasn't just about the first few weeks in transition, but we had to think about a whole range of things: sector challenges, increase in student diversity, social challenges and changes, understanding the transitions and the concept of engagement and belonging that's coming to the fore and how they all marry together. So let's look very briefly at some of the sector challenges. Let's face it, a day does not go past where we don't have more pressure put on us. We are weighed, we're measured, we're judged. We have a focus on metrics and league tables, reduced funding. We know how that feels, and we're seeing it up and down the sector with mass redundancies. It's very hard at times when you're under pressure to really have genuine institutional collaboration. But there's also, and this still persists, a real lack of understanding about changing student body and their prior experiences. And this is really pivotal. If we are to protect the pipeline of higher education, we need to think about the student body that's coming up, and in 15 years' time, the type of student body we'll have. Not the student body and plan for the next 2 or 3 years, but plan for 15 years down the line. Now, we can see an increase in 18-year-olds, but the proportion of 18-year-olds going on to university is actually, although they're going up proportionally, it is not the same as it was. And so again, we've got 18-year-olds who are maybe doing different routes in, apprenticeships, doing other type of things. Increased student diversity. Let's face it, we need recruitment and marketing to help us, but what students don't need are marketing role models. What they need are real models. As my vice chancellor, Professor Sir David Watson, would say to you. And also, the degrees are just a ladder on lifelong learning. These are very much images that we will see in prospectuses. That does not reflect on the situation facing our students. We know that disabilities and we know that certain characteristics impact on our incoming students. And it's really important to know that. But we still do not address the high levels of diverse entry qualifications, not only from overseas, but also from within the UK. More BTECs, we've got T levels, we have access, we have foundation, and yet we still function as traditional institutions, even post-92s that revolve around A levels. We can see from this, students' lives are complex. And yet, in the classroom, we look at them as faces. And many students today, as we know, need to work. This is not a new phenomenon. I had to work. I had to make a very tough decision of missing one lecture on one day so I could actually get a full day of paid work. The situation right across our student body is actually even harder to know, and not including maybe the middle class students who we think may be okay.
So as Michelle said, students, they don't always get the time of that picture of students having fun, but how realistic is that? This is data from a survey that we released last week. You may have seen the Student Academic Experience Survey between Advanced HE, which I lead on, and HEPI. This is the proportion of students in paid employment in term time. All this is freely available, the report's available if you'd like to have a look at it. You can see how that's really increased. It's actually started to go through the roof from if you look at in any paid employment. The sample, by the way, is full-time undergraduate students studying in the UK. So students in any paid employment, it was just under half as recently as 2022, went up to 55, 56%. The hours went up. This year it's continued to go through the roof, 65%, 68%, sorry, it may not surprise you, but it's interesting to see this starkly in this 10,000 fully representative sample. And I think a lot of people who aren't as close to the data, perhaps as people in this room, are maybe starting to take notice and realise what's beginning to happen out there. So some stark data on this that I'd be happy to share with you as and when, if you don't know, if you haven't already seen it.
The social changes and challenges. We have lived for the most craziest 5 years that I have known since I have been alive on this planet. Anyone who thinks that COVID-19 think again, because it's the impact of COVID-19 that's coming through. We have issues and challenges of those who came through primary school, infant school, primary school, secondary school. And so we still need to be mindful of this and plan for it. So if you knew that more than 80% of your students actually had sorry, 50% of your student body had attendance of 80% below, what would you do? But your university says you've got to have 100% attendance. How would you manage it? If you knew that it was down to illness, it was down to commute, how would you manage that? Would you consider, would you still have a timetable scattered across the week? Or maybe would you do block teaching? Would you adopt a different type if you knew this about your student body? We know that mental health is going up. Declarations is going up. That is a good thing because it means that we're providing a safe space where students can feel they can do that. During my age, I suffered mental health problems, but you didn't say anything. You were told to pull up your bootstraps, get on with it. I think it's a healthy environment, but it's about how we proactively deal with that. We have an integrated approach. If you haven't actually looked into the mental health charter, I'm one of the assessors for the University Mental Health Charter. It's a very, very good framework to get you thinking as an institution about what areas you need to look at. So if you haven't had a look, do have one. We know, and I've done this research over many institutions, that this is just from UEL in September 2024. Some of the classic issues that keep coming up, institution after institution. Obviously in 2021, when I did it in East Beckett and UEL and Bournemouth, COVID-19 and lockdown were major issues. They were right at the very, very top. But constantly, year in, year out, cost of living, coping with the level of study, worried about confidence about having to do this, funding, being able to afford accommodation. These are consistent issues. And if you knew by all sorts of student characteristics where these were challenges, you would have evidence that can then lead to change. So at UEL, we are quite a core institution, one of a lot of local students. So if you know that your students have never visited a library, never visited a university before, choosing it and turning up, so they don't know anything about the institution, about the campus, how to get here, the time it takes, what do you do about the onboarding process? We know that mature students are more likely to do this. You know, students with caring responsibilities, this is absolutely normal. So how are we going to change the information? Technology. You know, if you knew that your UK domicile were more likely to have an iPhone than an Android, and internationals more likely to have an Android, how does this affect the platforms that you put information on? We have an extensions platform built, and students with an iPhone couldn't click the submit button because there was a glitch in the software, but it's okay with Android. If you know students got an old phone, and actually they're going to be using that old phone mostly to access their information, what type of bursaries would you put in place to kind of help them? We think Gen AI is being used all over, is it? What we do know is that maybe Grammarly and ChatGPT are most used. They're still not hugely used amongst students coming in. Maybe that's because we have a lot of mature students. So there's a whole range of things that we need to think about. And some of them are listed here that you can read if you want to have the slides. But they are the knowledge gaps, so like confidence, digital experience, prior learning experiences, absolutely plenty. Understanding transitions. I realised nearly 20 years ago that when an entire cohort of Sri Lankan students came in to do their top-up engineering degree and they were accused of plagiarism, that we had failed them to do the proper onboarding. So we have students coming from all over the place. It's not linear, it's complex. And so it's about understanding all of those challenges we face when trying to develop a curriculum that needs to account for students who are going from level 4 to level 5 and students coming directly in. So transitions, really important. And I'm not going to go into the slide, but the first 4 transitions that I've covered are something I created this to try and help me as a practitioner to really drill down the stages that students needed to go through. And I won't go in detail, but these are the kind of things that every single stage you need to consider, setting expectations and the kind of questions that are asked. Pressure points. If you know the pressure points of students, you're better able to address them. And so, important in staff and points. If we don't look after our staff and staff don't know the pressure points for them, we're not really able to help our students. So it's like when you get on an aircraft If there is a disaster, you put your gas mask on first before helping someone else. Engagement and belonging. So I'm going to skip through the slides. I know we started at 5 past, but I'm very keen, Jonathan, to talk about the pre-arrival academic national pilots. When we talk about engaged, we know it's complex. Students' lives are complex. And what we do know, as we know from our own attendance in meetings, when we're addressing emails whilst trying to be actively talking to the Vice Chancellor. Belonging, unique to the individual. And actually, belonging is a concept created by the sector. And Liz, Thomas and I, who's still on the working group, Liz is very much aware of this. It's things like, you know, what makes you fit in? These are the kind of questions we need to be asking. What makes you feel valued? And as Liz says, the other thing is about literally compassionate leadership. Without compassionate leadership from the top, it is a problem. So what I started to realise was, if we really wanted to understand students and their journey through, we had to go back to the very beginning and understand the prior learning experiences so we could reach. Our job is to reduce the poverty of resources, and as for our students, but also for our staff. And as Ed Foster says, it's about knowledge and understanding, skills, motivation, self-belief, and personal capacity. Now, these are all resources that the students need, but actually we need as institutional colleagues and staff and leaders. We need to address this. And so over to you.
So the pre-arrival questionnaire has been developed initially by Michelle and then adopted by initially a smaller number of institutions. At an institutional level, it really is developed as a meaningful activity so that students can go through it or just really have a think about it. And it's just as much about they're really thinking about things. What are their previous study? What's previous study experience, qualifications, motivations? What's their expectations? What's their learning style? What's their preferences? And it's that course activity, so on or very close to joining. They get feedback in the current way it's run within institutions like UEL. They get feedback within 3 weeks, and they can start to really react and really make a difference. So how's that local level? How can it be translated into something nationally, something ideally sector-wide? Well, we probably haven't said so far is that Advanced HGGIS and UEL will receive funding from the OFS to develop this and to develop the first pre-arrival national survey across England. We've got we're going to work with 20 to 30 institutions, possibly a little bit more in the year one. With sort of delivery partners, so Advanced HGGIS coming along, working with Michelle and with crucially GISC as well. Not forgetting GISC in terms of those delivery partners. So at the sector level, certainly initially national level across England, and then hopefully beyond after the initial 2 years, is to establish that consistency in how the pre-arrival experience is understood and measured. There's great work happening, not least in this particular work, but if it's all done slightly differently, then what does good look like? How does anybody know they can compare what's happening, what their students are telling them compared to everybody else? So therefore, after we've got that consistency, it will drive that activity, it'll give robust evidence and really create that fuller understanding, and it will support institutions to really take action and really make sure the pre-arrival experience and therefore everything happening as a result of that is as good as it can be, and therefore that support is as good. And just based on the understanding and the understanding is based on understanding in a comparative sense as well, beyond potentially doing great work with no comparisons or talking to others and seeing how they're doing it. But you've got a level of consistency in terms of what's understood and how things are measured. So that's some of the key rationale behind what we're doing, what we've been given the opportunity to do. So we're implementing it at undergraduate and postgraduate level across 2 ways, or years as we're calling them. September this year will be the first, 2025 will be the start of it. Around about 30 providers in England. We've actually been lucky in that we've had more people expressing interest than there is room for in year one, which we're delighted about.
As Russell groups.
Range across the board, and I'll mention that very briefly. We really don't want to turn anyone down. If we have to do that, we'll be talking about can you participate next year as well. So we're really delighted and grateful for those saying they want to take part. It's free to take part. You do need a license for JISC online surveys. Many institutions already have that. And by taking part, you'll get analysis. You'll get your own results directly. Advanced HE will lead some analysis. We'll do benchmarking, comparisons. It'll be anonymised, and that this won't be any league tables on this, but you'll understand how you compare to groups of institutions. You might want to see how the Russell Group are doing. You might want to see how small and specialists are doing, how those in London are doing, for example. You'll get all that from taking part. There'll be sector-wide reports. There'll be wider analysis. And also there'll be an end-of-year conference. There'll be case studies. There'll be dissemination for what's working in terms of understanding the pre-arrival experience, so therefore help the pre-arrival experience work better. So you need to standardise it, standardise the measurement. Therefore, you maximise the understanding. Therefore, you maximise how you're transforming things. Guiding us, and we just had a meeting last week, we've got two key groups. We've got a steering group, range of really well-known people, and we're really grateful for these people to taking the chance to be part of this. And they're going to be part of this, helping set up, helping to make sure what we're doing makes sense. But also, they'll be getting the data. They'll be giving their own take on the data. We'll also be making the data in terms of sector reports. We'll make it publicly available, certainly perhaps from January, February 2026. People will be able to see the data, not related to institutions, but you'll be able to see the data across the 30 or so providers that took part. We've also got a working group that are working with us, people in slightly different roles, experts in specific areas. We've got also a survey expert as well, who's just looking at those survey questions initially designed by Michelle. So we've got these two working groups. So we do believe it's steered as effectively as possible. And again, we're really grateful for the kind of people who are offering to take part in this. Timescales is very quickly. If your institution in this room may well be taking part, you may well be taking part next year. You might be an interested observer. You might be keen to get the sector data or the sector report when it comes out. So September to October, we think will be wave. We believe will be wave one. We're just setting up at the moment. We're confirming participation. We're confirming the questions. January 26 onwards, well, there'll be benchmarking data for the first time. There'll then be work on the data sets that in a more public way, case studies dissemination, and then year two will take place. At the end of year two, we hope it'll be on the basis of being established, fully widely established. Would I call it business as usual in terms of a presentation earlier today? Well, we don't know, but we're excited about these next 2 years. Selection of the institutions. I think we've got 68 questions of interest. We're making sure it's diverse as possible. Virtually all regions of England are identified, are going to be part of it. Most types of institution as well. And we're just confirming those 30 or 34, I think it's going to be for year one at the moment. And we've got some technical, ethical advice. Institutions, if you're an institution, you own your data, we own the sector data, if that makes sense. So this way, we will never be telling anybody else what you or as an institution, you will know, but combined with great sector data, something similar to which me and my team lead for the postgraduate experience surveys, pre-test and the press survey, similar kind of data, but that's been steered by a steering group to make sure the ethics and data ownership makes complete sense.
So yeah, the whole point of this is we need to think differently. We're to reimagine, cannot use the same kind of thinking that we did right at the very start. We need to evolve. So this is what the project is about. It's not a regulatory survey. It's very much a survey that is there, like sales and pre-test support. It's going to be quite simple. And what we have left on the tables, if you're interested, is some leaflets saying, if you knew this, what would you do? And this is the kind of findings that the survey has kind of come up with. As I said, they're very different from the undergrad findings, very often different from the postgrad, which makes you realise you can't lift and shift from undergrad to postgrad. So, last one, thank you.
I'm from the University of Glasgow.
No, you can't participate.
It's for England.
Yeah, it's funded by students. Okay. But once we have done the pilot, and if we're able to kind of roll it out.
Yeah, it's purely funding OFS related for these upcoming 2 years, which is Quite embarrassing when we're having these conversations, but there's not an awful lot we can do about that in the short term, but hopefully beyond that.
And as I said, the one thing about what's important is that this is not a top-down activity. This is a survey that is pushed through at course level. So it gives students at course level a meaningful activity. So I don't sort of say to you, tell you what, I just need you to read that book and reading, and then we'll talk about it at some point in a seminar later when you arrive. And one thing we realised was, I realised a long time ago, it genuinely gets students thinking, how do I feel about that actually? And so, you know, that's why it started off as just a survey that students really didn't get feedback, because it was about how we could re-energise the postgraduate market. Students who we piloted have just said, we wish we'd done this before we arrived, because it got me thinking differently. So it's not about weighing and measuring and judging, unlike, say, NSS, where course leaders are actually taken out and publicly flogged if they haven't done very well about their completion. This is not the way weighing and measuring and judging. It is really as a temperature check for institutions, you know, and especially at school level amongst courses and disciplines. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for this very interesting and insightful presentation. I was thinking you were talking about induction and transitioning and knowing ahead. And why you were saying this, I was thinking that, yes, very, very important, but very often, still, it is a little bit on a theoretical basis. And I think when students actually come to university, and talking about from our perspective, we're teaching at King's Foundation, where it's international students coming to London and to the UK. I think students need more support while they are experiencing this transition. So it should be something that not only happens pre-arrival, but also during the first months, and especially if we think about culture shock, whether we believe in this U curve or not, it is something that kicks in after week 4, 6, 8.
Yeah, wobble week. It's one of the reasons I developed my model. You know, the first contact and admissions and the pre-arrival is all about pairing. And if you think about it like a traffic light system, you know, you've got the admissions, first contact and recruitment and admissions, and that's a bit like red. You can't do anything, and it's only then when actually you get confirmation and clearing or you've been accepted because you've got grades that actually go to amber and you're kind of getting ready to sit at the traffic lights, ready to actually go. And then you kind of get the green light, and that's kind of like arrival and orientation. But the first 2 weeks is not induction, it's arrival and orientation. That's all it is. Induction to study is a much longer period, and I argue you have to go through a full academic cycle, whether it's a semester or a year long, to actually understand that. And just as you induct students, say you have to do reorientation, re-induction for returners, and outduction, preparing students to leave. And if you've got students coming straight in to say level 5 as direct entry students, or articulating, I think you call it in Scotland, well, they've got to do the pre-arrival, the arrival and orientation, and the induction to study before they join the returning group. And so it's about how do you balance that? And realistically, you know, it's important, I think, that we're honest with our students right from first contact and admissions. We set the expectations because then they won't be disappointed or frustrated or concerned. But by getting this data, especially across nationally, especially across England to start off with, then actually I think it's going to shatter assumptions and it's going to provide the evidence that leaders need, which is why we've got so many policy experts like Pepe, Barnes AG, we've got TASO, we've got Guild AG, all leaders who can bring policy together and thinking from a national policy point of view, because that's going to be pivotal. Because at the moment, it feels like as institutions, we're screaming individually. And yes, we've got mission groups, but, you know, maybe I'm speaking wrongly here, but sometimes it does feel that Universities UK is very much a Russell Group dominated body, although they do fantastic work. And so it's about, you've got to lead with the data, and the data gives the evidence, and the evidence has to change. And so hopefully it's going to shatter assumptions and it's going to help people think differently.
Very helpful.
Well, to kind of, sorry, okay. Is this more about adapting our systems to kind of address these issues that students have, or helping students adapt to the system we have? And if it's a bit of both, where do we draw the line?
It has to be a bit of both. Everything's about compromise. You know, if we're making assumptions based on students, so for example, you know that 50% of your students who are coming in, who are 18, 19, only have experience of using a library. Because their school at college doesn't have a library. We've lost over 1,000 public libraries in the UK. So where are the students going to get the library experience? How are you going to build in library experience and embed it into the curriculum rather than having as a bolt-on welcome week activity that you've got to do? How do you embed it into the curriculum? So it's about getting the evidence to do a bit of both. So we need to advise and explain to students how they will learn, how it will be different at university, being upfront about it. Don't wait until welcome week. Do it from first contact and recruitment, because it's about honesty. And students, as I said, need real models. They don't need marketing money.
And one last explanation. I don't know if my institution has expressed an interest, as I was going to ask where this might sit. We in the business school we do a questionnaire which has been refined over the last couple of years, but I don't know if we are taking part in this. I'd like to find out. But I just wondered where it typically sits with the institutions that you're going to work with. Is it just going to be in a business school, for example?
No.
Or are you thinking one? It will be the whole institution that will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't mandate that.
Of course,
Institutions
yeah.
taking part, particularly, I think they were some were a little bit worried, thinking this is some regulatory thing. It's obviously the opposite of that. It's not that sort of project. But so we can't mandate that. But one of the things we were looking at in the expression of interest is how wide is this going to be? But ideally, it would be as wide as possible. Bear in mind that every institution is different, every case is different. But ideally, if it's across an institution, then we know that what goes into the sector benchmark is representative as possible across that institution. And that's the idea behind it. But every situation is slightly different.
We've got some really key messages when we meet with institutions. This is not an enrolment activity. This is not a recruitment, that it's a pre-arrival course questionnaire that is basically going to be pragmatic, and they will get feedback on, and they will. And I've created lots of materials institutions can use as templates to actually feedback 3 weeks, and we can turn around their findings quite quickly. So it's about us making sure the sector realise what it isn't and what it is and the benefits. And I do not expect an institution to come up with really great engagement at course level, because it's the first year. But when the results start to come out, people start to have that light bulb moment and they start thinking, whoa. But I get, in effect, of all eligible students, 70% start it, and I'll get a 65 full completion rate. So only 5% don't get to the end. And I think actually, we explain and we manage the situation to students, explain what it is about. Your course leaders will get this information to help. And we will also say things like disability, did you have a disability, etc., etc. There'll be notes in there saying, don't forget to get hold of your disability to call something, just to discuss this and make sure things are in place. So it's also about a nudge reminder to students. So,
Thank you.
so watch this space.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, thank you for being here. And we're looking to getting a water bottle. Hi, we are Chiara and Riyukta. I'm the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning at Northeastern University London, but I'm also an Associate Professor in English and Education.
Hi, I am Riyukta,
and I am the director of Global Experience Programs in Northeastern University, London, but I'm also an associate professor in English and education.
Right, so why are we here today? So in 2019, actually, when we started together with the same start date. We inherited a first year compulsory writing course. So these are really, they're very, very common in the American university system. And whilst we really enjoyed the experience of teaching together on this, so we really bonded and became very good friends as well as colleagues. We just see it just wasn't really working. What we were doing just wasn't really working. So we are trying to think, right, how can we reinvent this course? And about 2 years later, we reinvented the course on the principles of design thinking. And the course became First Year Writing Studio. And we want to talk to you about our experience of how we changed it and why we changed it. Also, just a couple of some data about the course. So this iteration of the course is run for 4 years now, with a large teaching team of up to 10 members of faculty. And to date, we have had 2,000-ish students on this course. All right, so the things that we really want to talk to you about today and what the session is about is, and perhaps our wish is that you'll walk away from the session today with new perspectives on how design thinking and teaching and learning intersect. So, and we're going to talk about this quite a lot. There's always two registers that we're thinking about. So one register is how are we using design thinking activities or principles in the classroom itself and in assessments, so the student-facing bit. But also the other thing, which was particularly powerful for us, is design thinking as a meta-pedagogical tool, right? How has it actually really affected us as educators and how we think about and prepare for the classroom?
Okay, so let's do a quick reflective sort of exercise, okay? So think of a recent assignment that you have encountered, one that you've created, one that you've done, and if it were a product, would you buy it? Let's do a quick show of hands. If your assignment were a product, would you buy it? Okay. Why would you buy your assignment? What's the USP?
Because I'm probably a little bit lucky position, but because what I have a chance to do is something that that actually some journalist was asking questions about and so on like that. We're lucky enough to be able to offer it for free. On that particular occasion, nothing to do with the quality of it. It just happens to be talking about things that actually there seems to be some of interest.
Yeah.
Okay, relevant. Okay, great.
Very nice. So on the left there that you see, this was our assessment, so pre-design thinking. So it's write a 2,000 word persuasive essay on a subject which can be approached academically, use expert sources, evidence, and academic perspectives to support your argument. So as you can see, it's not a bad prompt, but it's not great either, right? Because it talks about creating something structured, something rigorous, something that uses academic sources and so on. But there are lots of things missing. First thing, the audience. It seems like the only audience implied there is right for the instructor or right for the professor, right? It's also disconnected from students' lived experience, cultural knowledge, and so on. It also assumes that everybody goes through this sort of linear process, which is you brainstorm an idea, you write, we grade it, yeah? And the emphasis is on compliance over anything like creativity, engagement. You know, we're not looking to see whether students are interested in the subject they're writing about and so on. So we were asking students to perform academic tests before we actually help them connect with what they actually care about or how their lived experience could shape their arguments. So design thinking helped us flip that narrative around a little bit and reimagine the course, the assessments, the instructional design of the course as problem-solving, audience-centered, creative experiences. So would your assignments attract students if they had a choice? That question actually sits at the heart of design thinking as a meta-pedagogical tool.
Right, so just show of hands, who's familiar with design thinking kind of principles? Okay, so some, yeah. So if you're not, or perhaps the first time you Google design thinking, you often get these visual like things like that, right? So you have like different steps, like arrows. And I'm sure the ones of you might recognize these. So you have the D-School model, Stanford on the left, it's the 5-step model, or you have the IDEO model on the right with 3 eyes. You've got an infinite amount of different models, particularly also you've got, different models that are specifically for education as well. Now, the thing that for us is really important is that sometimes perhaps if you engage with it on a superficial level, you could come away thinking that design thinking is a very structured, limiting process, right? You have steps, you need to have you done this, have you done that? We like to think of it, and I think there's a lot of the literature agrees with us, is of these are not steps, but these are modes. And although sometimes it can be really helpful to go through these different processes, what you're actually after is a mindset, like a shift in mindset with the students. So for instance, we're kind of thinking, what if ambiguity is a feature and not a flaw? What if writing isn't about proving a point, but exploring perspective? What if failure isn't the end of the process, but part of the design? So, yes, so one of the things that I want to really make clear, we are going to talk a lot about what we like to call the set pieces of design thinking, but we kind of don't want to get too hung up about them, because I think they're kind of conduits of the mind that shift that we're after. You could do the same set pieces, but actually it not be productive. Equally, you could have a classroom that's very design thinking based without any of the very overt playbook of design thinking. So it's really about the mindset rather than anything else. Now, you might also think, so Riyukta and I are specialists in academic writing, and you might think, those two things don't really seem to go super well together, right? So how did we get to design thinking? So there is some sparse literature that kind of maps the writing process on design thinking, right? And that is, I think, valuable to some extent, but again, it kind of focuses on the surface of it, of the steps, rather than the actual mindset shift. And particularly as educators, it just didn't feel like very valuable. So we did a lot of looking. This was in 21, I think, and we have found some really inspirational examples. So Olin College in America, they had this first year engineering designing course where they pair engineering students with people in a nursing home to basically think about what can we design to help you. And it has a lot of these kind of playbook design thinking things, but the way that the whole learning was framed, so about being open, curious, collaborative, was really much based on a design thinking mindset. The same with Smith College, again in America. And this is a women's only college, and they have the design thinking initiative, where basically they're using design thinking across the institution to really foster interdisciplinary exchange. So these were kind of examples that we found really inspiring and that really kind of got to the heart of what we were trying to do with our course. So yes, exactly, sorry. Now, just to think, we're going to talk about this a bit more, right? About what our design challenge was as educators. So we teach very diverse, multilingual, multicultural cohorts. And we've really noticed that they were coming with a lot of behaviors and often learned behaviors that were actually not really productive for learning and also for writing. They were so afraid to make mistakes. They were really unable to pivot. They're like clung to their essay idea and no amount of feedback could get them to pivot, right? So what we wanted to do is we really wanted to shift their mindset. We wanted them to reframe learning about empathy, creativity, agility. We wanted them to be curious, open, collaborative, really important, okay with getting things wrong. Yes, and so the activities that we did enabled this mindset shift.
So what was our design challenge, right? So we took this course, we said we wanted to change it. So let's look at some of the design challenges we had. So this is presented as a sort of what students were saying And then we pair that with what we were actually observing in the classroom and what all of this meant together. So students were saying the writing class, it felt like a box to tick because the first year writing course for a lot of newer students is just a requirement that they need to get in the first year. So writing, what that actually meant is that writing felt like a performative task rather than a meaningful process. So they were all wrestling with academics. The STEM, so a STEM major student would say, I'm a STEM major, so what use is the writing class? So that's because students struggle to see connections between writing and their disciplinary or career sort of paths. This was because there was a lack of context. Writing is so boring. This is, one we get all the time. Students didn't feel emotionally or intellectually invested. They were under challenged. I didn't know who I was writing for, just the teacher, I guess. I felt like I was getting what they wanted to hear. So they weren't developing writing skills like critical thinking or voice, but they were actually just performing correctness or what they thought was correctness. I kept wondering if the way I was explaining things made sense here. So this we noticed especially in multilingual and culturally diverse students who felt very silenced or marginalized because they were bogged down by, the sort of rigorous academic sort of norms or rigor that we expect from the students. So what do? We put empathy in action. So what you see here is a profile of sort of a real life student. So this is an amalgamation of lots of different students we have met on our writing course. So meet Lena. So she's 19, she's Lebanese. Her language background is Arabic, English, and then she also knows French. She's a media and comms major. She's confident in conversations, but she's often self-conscious about her written English. She writes fluently in Arabic and French, but finds academic English vague and indirect. And she has some challenges. So she's never written an argumentative essay in English before. She struggles to understand implicit expectations, so things like structure or criticality. And she feels that her lived experience, so her stories, and the way she voices things has no place within academia. So what did we do, right? So what does empathy in action look like? So I'm going to do a quick 90-second empathy interview with Chiara here. So think of this like eavesdropping on a conversation you wish you had the time to have with every student that ever taken your course will ever take the course in the future. Okay, so I'm going to interview Chiara. She will take on the persona of Lena and listen to not just what she says, but actually what's beneath what she says. I'm going to pull up my script. Okay, hi Lena. So when you're writing in English for this course, what does it feel like?
Like I'm translating myself constantly. It's like I'm standing on a stage and everyone is listening to whether I pronounce the words right, even on paper.
What do you mean by that?
Like there's this accent in my head. I write a sentence in English, but I hear it in Arabic first. Then I worry, does this sound British enough? Does this sound smart enough? And I end up deleting everything that sounds like me.
And how do you think that affects what you actually write?
I play it safe. I pick topics I think I'm supposed to pick. I use words I don't use in real life. It's like I'm trying to impress an imaginary gatekeeper who wants me to sound like I've read The Guardians and stuff.
So what would it feel like if this gatekeeper didn't exist?
Liberated. I take risks. I'd write the way I think, not just the way I think you want me to write. And one thing, just a small note here, that we wanted to talk about Lena because many of our students are multilingual, but even with British students, no one's mother tongue is Academese. Yeah. So they also have that sense of alienation.
Yeah. So just to debrief a little bit, right? So Lena's not struggling with vocabulary. So if you try and actually hear what Lena's saying, she's actually struggling with voice. So with whether she's allowed to recognizably be herself in academic writing. So this is the hidden labor that lots of multilingual students often do in silence. And as Chiara said, it's not just multilingual students, actually. It's anybody who's ever had to sort of wrestle with academic English. When we redesigned our writing course with design thinking, we started asking what kinds of voices do our assignments implicitly reward? And what would it look like to center clarity, confidence, and authenticity instead of actually, all of these inherited codes of correctness.
So yeah, I'd like to talk about design thinking as a meta-pedagogical tool, right? So really, really change the way that we and actually our whole group of faculty work with approached the learning process and thank you very much, the pedagogical process and the instructional design process. So, so one thing that was really, really important, and I think this was mentioned in the assessment screen earlier today, is that it took actually a surprising, and I have to say kind of embarrassing amount to really reshift the way that we thought. Because often you just design for the student you wish you had, you design for the student you were, but you actually don't design for the student that you actually have, right? So that's a really, really important bit. Then the other thing is you need to remind yourself of that, but also you need to really define or kind of really try to put into words what is the experience that the student is having. How do you do that? Obviously, it would be great if we could do like an empathy interview. We can't do that, although in our course we ask students of actually, but like a pre-arrival questionnaire, we ask them to write a writing history letter. How do you feel about your writing? What's your history with writing? What kind of assumptions do you feel about writing? But we try to work really closely together with our student voice team to understand what they want. Also, there's actually so much you can observe in class just by behavior. What do students do? What they don't do? What activities get them engaged? What assessments get them engaged, etc. Then also diversity. We have a very diverse teaching team with really, really different backgrounds, and we're trying to honor that. We're also, this is a really big one. We redesigned this course, but now there's a really big team teaching it. And we really had to let go of this, my idea is the best, this is our course. So we really, really try to be really open and really, really collaborative in the way that we approach the course design. We also have very collaborative design days, so the whole team comes together and we map out the whole semester. And then finally, we do a lot of iteration and pivoting. So we have both virtual and actual spaces in which the teaching team can come together and go, what works, what doesn't work? Oh my God, this class just doesn't do what I wanted to do. What can I do? And so we think that that's all part of the design thinking process that we're taking to, that we're using as a meta-pedagogical tool.
So let's just look at how we redesigned traditional essay sequence through the lens of design thinking. So instead of asking students to simply write about a topic, so write a personal essay or write an explicitly essay, we gave them roles, we gave them an audience, and we gave them real-world context. So the personal narrative became a submission to a literary competition, asking students to write with emotion, ambiguity, and subtlety, not just the sort of tick box that they have to do. The exposure-free essay became a public-facing journalistic article that was grounded in credible research, but written for a general audience, not just an academic one. The persuasive research paper became a call for papers response, informed by disciplinary thinking, yes, but also shaped by a theme: disruption, resilience, and reflection. So this is more than just a repackaging of old assignments. It's actually a fundamental shift from product, we're now focusing on process. From writing for a grade, the emphasis now is on writing with a purpose. So, and we noticed that students just rose to the occasion because the prompts respected their experiences and agency. So just going back to Lena now. So before it was a standard personal essay prompt. Now it's a real world writing opportunity, asking students to reflect on the ambiguous, on the emotionally complex experiences, and so on. So that little voice in Lena's head, now instead of erasing her Lebanese identity, she can now say, my version of joy actually comes with sorrow. It's sitting on the roof during Eid, drinking bitter coffee in silence. That's when I felt joy, and I didn't have to translate that. Or with the journalistic article, she thinks, now I get to choose the topic. I wrote about misinformation in Arabic media, something I've never been asked to talk about before, right? So she starts seeing herself in her writing. And the assessments were only part of the shift. We also had to reimagine how we taught, not just how we assessed. So that meant turning the classroom into a studio. So that's just an example of the kind of things that we do in the classroom. So we use different design thinking activities or set pieces that Chiara is going to talk about in a second. So students mapped the perspectives of imagined readers using NLP maps. They reframed big essay topics into how might we questions. In peer review, they tested and iterated drafts like designers. So they were sketching ideas, they offered feedback, and they celebrated every little mistake they made because they learned from it.
And I know that we're close.
Almost.
Almost. So this is right. This is a long way. So I know that I kind of been saying, like, don't think about the set pieces. It's about the mindset. I can't say that. Mindset shift. But actually, lots of these kind of design thinking playbook things are really, really foster belonging in the classroom. For instance, they provide a varied diet of engagement. So you have activities that, there's some activity that's good for a student who doesn't like to write, ironically, but who's better orally. There are things for people who don't like to speak up in class because they're introverts, right? You have activities that model constructive collaboration, feedback, and negotiation. How do you take up feedback, right? How do you actually listen to feedback? And yes, so and if you want to hear more about them, then you can ask, but I know that we're out of time.
So very quickly, just to summarize, the design thinking activities in the class, it teaches new skills, but it also communicates a set of values. And this was really important to us, right? So everyone has something worth saying. Because in a writing class, this positions writing as an active connection. It affirms students' lived experience as a valid source of insight. Your voice shapes real-world conversations because students are emotionally invested, so they see their writing as something that's alive, something that has impact, and it's not just an assignment that they have to finish. Writing is a collaborative, exploratory act, so it normalizes iteration. So those students that feel pressured to sound correct or pure academic writing are now affirmed by this process that they've been through. So by embedding these set pieces in our classroom, we created an environment that says you belong because your thinking and your ideas matter. And it's not just because you meet some sort of set expectations of what a writing class, what you need to be in a writing class.
Thank you.
Thank you. Time for 2 quick questions, please. Anyone? Yes. Yeah.
I'm just asking to have clarification here. Is everything you do, they have to do all the work in the class? So I'm just wondering how you design out sort of AI collusion with this kind of thing.
We actually had a conversation about that this morning. So we do actually do a lot of in-class writing. But it might be that then that's part of a portfolio that's attached to the submission as a kind of proof of how they got there. For instance, we're now thinking about how we're going to integrate AI into the course in a much more kind of AI literate manner. But yes, we generally, because we don't want students to kind of writing is thinking, right? So students really need to. It's not the end product. So even, before AI, we really encouraged, this is why it's called studio. It's like, let's do writing every time we're in class, let's do writing.
So we do a lot of like scaffolded activities in the classroom, right? So for example, if the final product is an argumentative essay, we kind of build out the arguments in layers in the classroom. So today you learn a little bit about how to write a thesis. Now let's all work on this together, right? You do some group activities. So we might do an ideation exercise together as a group. So you brainstorm, what am I going to write for my expository essay? What's my journal article going to be? So you do that as a group, they come up with ideas. So we sort of break everything down in layers and try and do as much of the work beforehand. And then all students have to do is sort of put the pieces together, essentially. That's what I'm saying from Jeff, please, Michelle.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
That's lovely, thank you. I suppose the question I've got is, we're on such rush time. Do we build a safe space into the curriculum to enable students to fail? Because we learn through failing. Failing isn't failing, failing is learning. And it just seems that we don't have that luxury anymore to revisit topics, to actually go back and allow time to pull things apart and really understand why things don't necessarily work well. And we always know, we know with drugs that, you may have failed, but oh, look, actually, we found that it actually is going to help that illness, that disease. So, there just doesn't seem to be enough.
Yeah, which is true. And, just going back to that initial diagram that Chiara had, which is like this sort of cyclical process, right? So you go through this process, you test it, you fail, and then you do better, and then you come back. So which is why, this is sort of, we've tried as much to embed this sort of cyclical iterative process into the writing course, because like we said, we get students to celebrate the mistakes, to celebrate the flaws, because there's learning at the end of it.
And our assessment is also multi-structured. So I know you talk about reflection, massive, huge on reflection. So there's a really big part of assessments often have, the actual product, and then they go, right, how did you get here? What were the drafts that you got, and we asked them, you need to talk about feedback that you received. How did you act upon the feedback, right?
Or how were you not able to act upon feedback, right? Like what else do you need?
Yeah.
And with the whole AI and writing, like that's one of the things everybody's talking about, right? And you're using ChatGPT to generate sort of original drafts of things and so on. So then this whole reflection and talking about the process of writing becomes so much more important, because that's where the learning is. The learning is no more in the product, because AI can now do that. So the learning is actually in the process that leads to the final product. So we've tried to make that really explicit and tease that out in the course.
Yeah. And just to one more thing, I think one thing, time is a big problem in this. And I think we've made time for this anarchist. We find that actually often the kind of mindset of educators is often the problem, because this idea does not fit with this stage on the stage thing at all. Yeah, at all. You need to really let go of I know everything, and you need to be really open, because often it's just actually like it's completely different to the way that we were taught. I mean, apart from some amazing teachers, but. So it's a really, really big, you really need to let go of that mastery. And I think, and just be like a facilitator of learning, rather than I've got all this stuff and you need to receive all this knowledge that I will impart on you, right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
All the way from Glasgow. Thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, that's great. Just to sound present. Amazing. And get to look at that. Work.
Okay, great. So
I'm going to be using Mentimeter for this. So for those that might not be familiar with Mentimeter, if you go to menti.com and then type in the code at the top of the screen, I've got some questions for us to think about during my presentation. So to make it a little bit interactive, it's 5 o'clock. So so my name is Jenny Crow. I am a PhD student at the University of Glasgow, looking into belonging for online students. I also have a role as the College of Medical, Veterinary and Life Sciences Digital Education Team Manager. So I work a lot with staff in developing online programs for the University of Glasgow. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk to you a lot about my PhD research in belonging. Yeah, so first of all, it's really great to have some background to our project. So,
Sorry, so you should quickly give us the code again.
Reading it out, I can't see it. So it's 1233 0234. Right, so being a good PhD student, it's always good to have background to the project. So while doing some reading, I came across belonging as something that really could impact the student journey, particularly for online students. Online students can feel a lot more alone in their studies. Belonging is an interesting subject. It's quite subjective. There's lots of different factors that impact belonging: disability, ethnicity, income level. And this can be quite a lot of background things students arrive at university. Online students can struggle with things like time zone as well, which makes it quite a challenging and different experience. Although from what I've done my research, there are some overlaps with on-campus students that are increasingly doing more work, and also commuting students as well. I undertook 28 online interviews with the online students within the College of Medical, Veterinary and Life Sciences. Each were 30 minutes long, so it's a lot of data. I took phenomenography as my method. So for those that may be not familiar with phenomenography, what that really impacts is that the interview style is semi-structured interviews with probing questions to really explore the situation, to really understand what it's like from the participant's point of view. It also then impacts the data analysis, so you bring all the data together and then create categories of description and an output space. It's also helpful to understand a bit about the population. So the students were studying a variety of different postgraduate programmes at the University of Glasgow. There were a range of different years. So typically the students studied part-time over 3 years. So a range of different programmes, from those that are more educational based with an embryoless plant on them, to some that are very clinical, to some that are science and animal based. But I think the findings that I found could be applied in other subject areas. They weren't particularly unique to the medical, veterinary and life sciences. Yeah, so now over to you, because I don't have all the answers. So I thought it's a chance to think about how you would encourage belonging with your students. So if you go to menti.com, if you've not already got your phone, and then you should be able to type in a response in there. Hopefully you will appear on the screen. Right, some good ideas. A little moment more and then we'll move on. Okay. Scroll down a bit on the screen to see these buttons. Great, thanks very much for taking part. It's always great when people take part in these things. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to share some of the student responses, because there's nothing like hearing from the students themselves. So first of all, I think it's great to set the scene about who these participants are. I'll give you a little moment to read, because it's quite difficult to read and listen to somebody at the same time. So I think there are some differences with online students, and that they're often juggling work and home life, which can mean fitting in their studies can be quite a challenge, and often different priorities that they have. A number of them said that they wished to visit the campus and they felt that they were missing out from that experience. And also it's really interesting that they felt a deeper connection in some cases to the people in their cohort rather than the overall university. What I would say is that there wasn't one size fits all, and there was a variety of different experiences through the different participants. One of the big categories of description was around staff presence, and this was really important in creating belonging for these students. So I'll give you a little moment to read some of these comments. So having staff involved in the online experience is vital. Students really wanted to get to know the members of staff, and there was something about the frequency of presence from these members of staff that really made a difference. That could be illustrated in various different ways. It could be videos, it could be posting on the forums, getting back to students. There was a variety of different ways. Also, like about guiding the learning experience was something that was really important. Well, I'm going to treat that. So there was something about the proactive nature of the staff, really getting to know the students, being involved in learning experience. Also, like the second but last comment, it seems like it was more than support. There was something more that was needed rather than being a kind of support to the students, which I thought was quite interesting. So the next big category of description was around relationships with peers, which was really interesting because I think a lot of the literature is what that I found around belonging was in relation to on campus. I was really interested to hear whether friendships would be possible in an online space and what students were looking for from their peers. It seemed to be that a lot of them are looking for support, and how we do that in an online contact. Things like WhatsApp groups did seem to be a platform that students were on. I know that we have various challenges with the fact that we don't have data sharing agreements, usually with WhatsApp, and how we do this. But I think one interesting comment from somebody at my local university was that on-campus students are also on WhatsApp. So is it a problem that online students are on WhatsApp? And what kind of spaces do we create for these online students to meet each other, to ask questions about assessment, to almost have a bit of a coffee shop experience? Some students are looking for more social connections with each other. They're looking for extracurricular activities with peers, but others don't have time. Well, I'm going to read that. There were some challenges around BLEs and how speedy those connections were, and making those systems easy for students. Students also shared that they have heard something that looked a bit like a social media platform that was quite easy to use, and how we make those connections flow quite easily. There was also something about kind of facial connection with their peers that some students are looking for, and how we do those kind of introductions. Students really, particularly at master's level, come with a wide variety of work experience, different backgrounds. How we get them to share that? The video introductions was something that seemed to really work with this group. They weren't a very large cohort, so I think if you had thousands of students on your programme, maybe videos wouldn't work because you wouldn't watch thousands of videos. But for smaller groups, it seems like things like video introductions between peers works quite nicely. How we do communication with another group of comments that the students shared a lot about in the interviews that I did. One of the things that really interested me is how we get students to partake in each other's learning journey. Who are they communicating with? Are they communicating with the member of staff when they're participating in the forum post? Are they communicating with their peers? Are they communicating only with the learning? And how do we get them to have more of a conversation rather than doing a single post? And when students are busy, it's a challenge because they're kind of like, oh, I'm time poor. I don't have time to read everyone else's comments. And how do we get them into a kind of way of discussing the learning and really bringing out ideas? Also, synchronous communication was one of the biggest things that they shared that really helped them feel like they belong. Having that shared space together, being able to ask questions live, being able to ask follow-up questions, see their peers be in the same space was something that they really appreciated. But there were challenges around time zones and work commitments that made that they couldn't always be there. So there were some comments about when students don't participate and what that looks like in the learning. I think there were some reasons for that I did find out. Sometimes it's they're too busy. Sometimes they don't feel confident posting in the space for multitude of reasons. Sometimes they don't feel they're good enough. They don't have enough experience to be able to post. Some said that they found it easier to speak because English was their second language, which I thought was quite interesting, and time commitments as well. So I'm from a technology background, so there was less comments about the technology than there was about things like staff presence, relationship with peers, which was really interesting to me. They did really appreciate the flexibility of the programs that they had, and being able to learn on the go, being able to listen to their learning on their way to work, which made it easy for them to fit it in with their lives. If they're working and juggling lots of different responsibilities. I would share that each of these different programs had learning technology support. So it did enable things like accurate transcripts, which in turn then created this inclusive learning experience. One of the big benefits this last comment issue is about is diversity. What I think is one of the beautiful things about online learning is when you get people sharing about their different diverse experiences, their different cultural perspectives, but it's how we get them to share those experiences. And I think that when we get them to do that, it really makes the programme come alive with diversity. And sharing about, oh, this is what there was experience about camels and things like that, which was really interesting, and the students really appreciated that diversity. But there is also a role of staff in that, encouraging students to participate, but also creating this welcoming environment for the students to be able to share these different perspectives. Also, if there's any inappropriate behaviour, like if somebody's maybe excluding others in their language, to be able to challenge that and facilitate those discussions. So, some lessons learned. Obviously the group work was pointed out earlier. Students really appreciated group work. Quite a few that I've talked through these already. Students also really liked being part of evaluation. A number of them were class reps. They really appreciated when their points of view were taken on board into the future. We definitely have some challenges around time zones. It seemed to be the greater the time zone, the more disconnected they felt. So if they were, say, 6 hours ahead or behind, that had increasing challenges, and they often felt more disconnected because of that increase in time zone. Student spaces that allowed for students to participate at any time did seem to mitigate that, but there were some challenges, and then that still. Okay. Yeah, so this is what I'm working on next. I'm trying to write up my PhD. No, it's not an easy thing while working full time, and I'm working on sharing wits and different things. I'm also running some virtual coffee sessions for our dissertation students, because it seemed like the dissertation stage was a lot more lonely, but because there was less check-in points. So finally, over to you. It's always good to have an opportunity to reflect. Anything you think about putting in practice, any other ideas you've thought about while we've been thinking about belonging? So your chance to have a little think. Great, yeah, I think induction is still a challenge in how we do induction for online students, and been considering induction is a longer thing rather than only being 1 week. And we've got some various projects happening at the University of Glasgow and thinking about kind of different stages of induction. It does seem to be a bit of a pressure point at the start when the first couple of weeks. But there's also sometimes at the start there's an overwhelming amount of information, and it's how we almost drip feed that information. But yeah. It's also interesting about how we try and incorporate more students into the wider university. Some students in the online space have more time and would like to do social events. They want to participate in research projects. Thinking about PhD and how we incorporate those students into the wider university. Others are like, I don't have the time. I am working but it's not one size fits all. Some want to do social events as well, and how we do extracurricular activities that are inclusive for all students, which I think is still something the University of Glasgow is working on. Great, okay, I've got 2 minutes to go. Okay. So yeah, so that's me. So I'm very happy to take any questions. Yeah, also thanks to my supervisors who have been with me for the journey. And yeah, very happy to connect with anyone in the future as well.
Yeah. Feels very great. One of the things that I want to ask you was that is something about speed function and response speed. I wonder if you've done any research on that.
So the comments that I received about speed were some people, unfortunately, when staff didn't get back to them at all, or if they waited weeks for a reply. I think there's got to be some boundaries around online, and that students have an expectation about the time window that you can get back to them in. Because I think otherwise students are learning at the weekends and then, well, I didn't get a response in 24 hours. So I think it's about setting that expectation that your working hours are this, or some students would like a virtual office hour as well. So it's maybe providing some opportunities for those kind of things.
I think it's the other way around, actually. And that is the one I find is that get an email or something like the quicker I do it, the greater sense of belonging they feel. Because I feel so I think from that perspective, not from the expectations, we don't manage that. But I just wondered if you have to put something.
So I think we have lots of chats about our VLA Moodle and over Teams, which is our other platform at the university, and how Teams is instant and Moodle there's a delay in those interactions. I think we do live in the world of instant interaction, so having to wait. I think for me it's more about, I suppose, ease of systems. Students also fed back that if they were based somewhere else in the world or they were on a different rota, having someone get back to them in a reasonable time frame, I think within 12 hours. But I think that was probably, but it wasn't necessarily an instant interaction, I would say.
That's your question. And I just go back to the COVID days, because there was a time when online created community and belonging during the peak periods of COVID. And yet we seem to have lost the online ability to do that now as normality has come back. So is there a way we can capture that? Again, the benefits of it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think it depends what you're looking for. So I think these students they don't necessarily, their peer group aren't next to them in a lecture hall. So having an online community is good for them in that way. But also some students feedback that they're not on social media because they're choosing to meet people in person, which I thought was quite interesting. They're choosing an online course, but also they're reducing their social media time because they want to participate with people in person. Which is, yeah, but I think online learning in some ways is necessary for them because it fits with their lifestyle. It's almost like a compromise for them because they don't want to change country, they don't want to give up their work. It's how they can fit in their learning with the other stuff that they have going on in their lives. These wouldn't naturally be on campus students who can take time out to do these qualifications. Don't know if that answered your question.
So virtual field approaches have the strongest impact. We do quite a lot of innovative approaches, and virtual field have the strongest impact.
So I think it's more about the overall themes. So it's staff presence, for instance, can be done in various different ways. It can be done through video, it can be done through live sessions like Zoom, it can be done by a lot of presence on Teams or discussion boards. So there's there's a bit of flexibility, depends on your personality. Some staff did summaries each week. It's about the kind of regular presence rather than the mode. The technology makes it happen, but it's almost about the overall bigger themes rather than the kind of one. It's not every silver bullet, if that makes sense. But I think there's something about the frequency of student presence as well. It's about regularly participating, it's about regularly engaging. It's about that more than anything else.